to the early morning edition of the Friends of Fantasy Benefits Baseball Podcast. I mean, early morning for me, it is 10 o'clock, 10:20 in the morning here. It is 1:20 in the afternoon for Dave. But our special guest, Ryan Owens, you better know him as RotoTrix. It is 6:20 in the evening for him. So this is why we are recording at a different time. I kind of like it. I'm wide awake. I'm fresh faced. Ryan, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. It's kind of cool. We've got 3 different time zones. This couldn't be more eclectic. This is nice. It's nice to see you both.
I used to do a podcast on the Friends of Fantasy Benefits feed with Scott Chu and Darius Austin. And so this was a regular occurrence. We'd have to kind of line up time zones, with Scott being Eastern time and Darius being in England. But before we jump in, because I do want to talk about just being a baseball fan in England, that it's got to be a different kind of breed. Let everybody know where you can reach the social media and talk about what you do.
Yeah, well, on Twitter, as you sort of alluded to, I am RotoTrix. So if you've ever come across me, I'm usually tweeting about baseball. And that's my main shtick, especially during the sort of, during those winter months where I'm prepping and once I've emerged from the cave that is my office at home and got some ideas about things, I start to sort of put my ideas out there. There is the occasional soccer meltdown on my feed as well, for which I can only apologize. Some people in the British community have, you've mentioned one already. There's loads now. We're a small group, but we're a group of mainly dedicated fans that love the sport. Everyone's positive. Everyone is looking to sort of put out. There's kind of 2 camps. We get the camp of some guys that are in it to watch baseball for baseball and are enjoying it as a sort of pure fan. And I'm more in the fantasy baseball spreadsheet nerd camp, as is Darius, who you've already mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, how popular is baseball just in general in England? Because I don't think of it as a sport that travels really well outside of South America, Central America, Caribbean islands, and then Japan. So is baseball becoming a more popular sport in England?
I think you'd undoubtedly say it's becoming more popular, but that doesn't necessarily take it to popular levels because, it feels like any country really has room for one bat and ball sport, and England plays cricket and England watches cricket. And you guys don't play and watch cricket, pretty much. You guys do baseball. So that's kind of how I don't know why it seems as though every country is willing to accept more than one sort of ball sport. But if there's a bat involved, it's one sport only. You choose your sport. The NFL's big here. The NBA is big here. Hockey and baseball kind of trailing behind a little bit. But as I say, the group that is watching is growing and is passionate, and we've got a good thing going.
That's great. I don't hear. You guys with your RotoBrits podcast. For those of you who don't know, Ryan and Pete do the RotoBrits podcast together. It's one of my favorite podcasts. It's pretty quick. It's usually like an hour to 90 minutes, if I'm right. Ryan, is that about right?
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered to say what podcast I'm on, because I completely forgot. You can see why Pete's better at this than me. Pete would already plug the pod.
Pete's the host, Ryan's the talent, as we say. So Peter Pratt is a well-known, huge Marlins hawk. He's got his own Marlins podcast. He's constantly tweeting about the Marlins. Not as many people know that you're a huge Phillies fan, as you can see that flag behind you. There with the Philadelphia Phillies. How did you get into, how did you become a Phillies fan?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I watched the NFL prior to watching baseball. I was the sort of watching leading up to the season that the Eagles went on to play the Patriots in the Super Bowl, the Donovan McNabb sort of Brian Westbrook era there. And the Eagles were a huge underdog. So naturally, I supported the underdog, and didn't work out too well that evening. Although many years later, I'm glad to say that an Eagles-Patriots Super Bowl did pay off for me. I just had to wait a while for that. It's funny. They used to show baseball in the UK on non-paying TV. We have sort of 5 channels, or we have more now. We used to have 5 channels here in the UK that were free to broadcast. And the 5th channel, which is sort of the least popular, for some reason had a deal to show baseball every Sunday evening. And they had a studio guest, they had a presenter, they had a guy called Josh Chetwynd, who is someone you may be aware of, who was the sort of expert in the studio, baseball analyst. And when I was at university, watching the Phillies and all sorts of baseball in that era was just, it was free. We were always awake. We were drinking beer. We were eating curry. We were doing whatever we wanted to do. And baseball just became a part of my life and has been ever since. And being an Eagles fan, I'm a Phillies fan.
I love it. So you talked about how the sport of baseball has been growing in popularity recently. What about fantasy baseball? You mentioned that that's more what you're into. Is the UK kind of getting more into fantasy baseball on the whole as well?
Yes, I think with fantasy baseball is interesting. I don't know whether you would agree with this. There are lots of people that are into fantasy baseball and lots of people are into it for different reasons. You get your sort of colloquial sort of fans that are doing it with some mates and not taking it too seriously, but want to win, and that's fine. And there are a lot of those that are doing that now. If they're watching baseball a bit, they may join some leagues. There does seem to be a hardcore group of us in the UK now that have taken that to the next level, where we've spend way too much of our free time and maybe some of our working time actually sort of trying to get good at this, And that's always been my character, Dave. As you know, we've spoken on podcasts before. I'm not really in things to not try at them. If I'm in, I'm trying to win, and not in some sort of douchebag way, but just because if I'm there, then I'm going to put in the effort to understand the sport better,
Yeah, absolutely. And, you and I have talked a lot about that. And, Ryan's one of the people that I DM with a decent amount throughout the season and everything. So, and I've been on their RotoTrix podcast twice now, which was an awesome experience. So Justin, got some questions for him about the fab time differences here?
I do, because it's one thing to be a baseball fan anywhere in the world, right? But how do you watch baseball? Because the games come on at 4 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night here, depending on where your time zone is. So that means they're often coming on in the middle of the night. So are you watching replays mostly, or are you staying up late? Like, how do you get those baseball games in?
Or are you ignoring watching and just basing everything you do on the numbers?
I'm no Peter Pratt. Pete Pratt, as you said, my fellow host, is a massive Marlins fan. He will stay up through all hours at the weekend and doesn't mind if it affects him into the start of the next working week, and he'll keep going. And there are loads of fans in the UK like that. Dave Shaw, who runs the UK Phillies, Nick, who runs the LA Angels UK Twitter account. These guys are very hardcore in terms of staying up and watching their team. I'm a Phillies fan and a massive fan, but particularly during the uni days. But as that became more fantasy baseball, I watch less baseball. I can win and enjoy fantasy baseball without watching. I picked up a fantasy ice hockey league a few years ago, and I didn't know anything about the player pool. But once you start learning how the sport works a little bit, and you learn about the player pool, and you work the spreadsheet, and you can win. You could win without watching a single game all season, to be quite frank. Now, I'm not advising that, because it is useful to watch the players slightly, but I don't think it's necessary, really. You won't catch me up at 3 a.m.
So then how, from a fantasy baseball perspective, like Fab runs for NFBC at it's like 7 p.m. my time, which means what, you're 8 hours ahead of me. That is what, like 3 a.m. your time. Like how do you like do your Fab? Do you just like you do it before you go to bed and pray that nothing happens in the meantime? And then how do you set lineups? Like lineups have got to be insane too.
It's really interesting. I suppose it's less than ideal in the sense that something could happen in the 3 hours that I go to bed. But like now, enjoying like the NFBC format where it runs weekly, and I have time to really put the process together, and I will put that together and be quite happy to go to bed at sort of 11 p.m. UK time and hope really that nothing major occurs in the sort of 4 or 5 hours or whatever it is before it runs. If you're in a daily league where the lineup or like where you can have daily lineups, that can be tougher. But really, it's only the West Coast teams in those leagues that start to annoy you. And it's nice that lineups post 3 or 4 hours before the games because that gives you a fighting chance to maybe see who the D-backs are rolling out there. And you just got to pray that you don't have too many D-backs, really.
and you've been super successful. I was just actually bringing up the historical standings in TGFBI. You were the 15th ranked competitor historically in TGFBI, with all 3 of your years in TGFBI finishing in the top 69.
That is super impressive on its own, but considering the fact that you also have to deal with all the time zone differences and not being able to make last minute changes and all that, it's ridiculously good. I was curious, Ryan, I just thought about like, are there players from certain teams that you like kind of avoid because of like when they play usually, like West Coast teams or East Coast teams?
No, that's a good question, but no, that would be slightly insane, I think.
Right.
It would, because it would just put you at such a massive disadvantage if you were like wiping out 4 West Coast teams. So, like, no.
I didn't think it would be that. I thought maybe it would be like a tiebreaker, like if you're between 2 guys, you're like, well, this guy.
I've never even thought about that, Dave. It's an interesting that you bring that up, but no. Like I say, I think it's pretty rare. I mean, all right, you may miss on the odd start, and that is just something that living here is that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. And it's probably a reason why we actually can't play the NFBC high stakes leagues for sort of legal reasons. So unless we have sort of someone out in the States that's gonna sort of help, like a friend or something that's gonna do it. So I suppose putting on big bucks, I would probably want to be living in the States. And that's probably a fair point at that moment in time, because then it would be more of an issue. The league that I actually do spend some money on is an NL only league. But our lineups, we run Fab twice weekly, and it's a bit of a strange sort of archaic way that they do it via like email and stuff like that. These guys have been running this league for quite a long time. So the way that the lineups work in that league where I've got money on it, it doesn't really matter what the D-backs roll out because my lineup's set prior to that anyway. So the way that it works is quite nice.
Now, is this the league that you fly to the United States to do your draft, or was it Maryland?
Yeah, there's a story behind that. Yeah, so one I met a fella out in New York, Long Island, a long time ago, and good friends, and he sort of jokingly asked me one. It's like we've got a position come up in this long-term money league, NL only, but we do draft in person in Maryland, and it's annual. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he was slightly surprised. The weird thing is I've only actually flown out there once because then a global pandemic came and we've done it on Zoom ever since. Yeah. So, which is annoying. I mean, it saved me some money, but hopefully we're back out there next year because honestly, it's a great experience. Just drafting and auctioning actually in person is just absolutely fantastic.
There's nothing like live drafting, and it's why I tell everybody you got to get out to Vegas to do NFBC someday. I'm hoping you can as well, because like that that is when this became like more than just a hobby for me. When I wanted to really take this more seriously, the live drafting aspect is just it's so amazing, and the community of everybody there, and getting to talk to people who are some of the best players in the world. And there's nothing like it. I would absolutely.
I'm not sure I want to be in those dodgy hotel rooms in Vegas with you and all those guys. To be honest, I appreciate the offer, but I'm kidding.
It's an experience, I can tell you for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
it is. They've replaced most of the dodgy hotels. They've got some nice ones there too.
I don't need Mike the Mouth ribbing me while I'm making picks either.
Nope, nobody needs that.
That's
no.
He's almost certainly going to annoy me to the point where I'm making a bad pick, and I know that's his whole shtick, but that's definitely going to affect me, I think, in person.
Yeah, you might need to bring some noise canceling headphones. I don't know that those would work on Mouth though, so I don't. No, there's so many people there. You can pretty easily avoid people unless they're in your league, which would be unfortunate in that aspect. But the good thing is that he doesn't win very often, so you can take his money more easily. So, so no matter how long you played for it, you're still constantly learning. What's one lesson that you've learned this season so far?
Oh wow, yeah, that's this season in particular. That's so interesting. I think that this season actually, TGFBI was probably the first league that I drafted. I don't really like mock drafting. I'm not a mock drafter. That's not a lesson I've learned. The lesson that I did learn this year, though, is that I don't really want a league that I sort of really care about to be the first draft that I do. I think that I would position a league that I'm in, perhaps a home league, something like that. Mock drafting is a bit stupid because you're welcome to do it if it helps you and sort of map out. I don't mind it if you're sort of like mapping out eventualities and that sort of makes sense. Maybe like using Rudy Gamble's sort of projected picks and looking at his spreadsheet. That sort of stuff's fine, but I would use a home league first, just because I think it opens your mind up slightly to how the market feels and stuff. I find myself a few times this year in TGFBI. I'll always adapt to what happens, but I was a little, annoyed that was my first draft this year.
No, that is a really good point. My podcast partner, well, I don't know if I can call him that since we're not podcasting, but Jake from one of my best friends from High Stakes Heat. He always does. He's for years has always done like a really early draft champions league, because not only is it'll be like a cheap one, like a 150 or something. Well, cheap for him, and it'll get him in the right mind frame and get him thinking about guys. And it's usually, I mean, he usually does pretty well with his first one, but he also knows that if he makes mistakes, it's only $150. It's not like he's putting $1,700 on the line, like for the main event or something like that, or his auction. So, he's also learning to play. That's how he learns the player pool. Like, Jake's not a guy who's just going to sit down and do research, unless he is he constantly needs something to be the impetus for him to do something. So it's like, okay, I'm in this league. I now have to do this. So now that he has to do it, now he's doing it. So
learning the player pool is an interesting point that you made, because I seem to remember this offseason, we had a discussion about whether we liked Jesus Sanchez. I think it may have been Jesus Sanchez, and you immediately fired back two guys that were going in a similar range to him. It may have been different players, but you were straight off the bat coming back to me, and because it was so early in draft season for me, I hadn't quite equated those players in the same conversation. Right. And that's the point. Once you're in a draft that means something to you and you want to do well in it, you you want your brain to sort of immediately spark off with, right, if I do this, this is an impact on this and an impact on this. So that makes sense to me.
And this is why I do a ton of early drafts, and people like Dave think I'm crazy, but I start drafting in October, and I do 5 or 6 or more drafts before we get to March. One, it's to kind of really know the player pool, but two, it's I don't like mock drafts. because I don't like often people are quitting them like halfway through or even earlier. And I don't think you get a very good level of kind of competition in mock drafts. I think mock drafts are great if you play in just casual leagues. If you're just playing in your casual home league and that is your only league, then I think mock drafts are great because that'll be the kind of competition you face in your kind of non-competitive home league. But if you're playing in more competitive leagues, I think mock drafts tend to become pretty useless.
With nothing on the line, you can't get a feeling for really where guys are actually going because there's not, people can take whoever they want. They can take a super injury prone player just because it'll be like, well, look, it's Fernando Tatis Jr. Not because you're actually gonna when you have money on the line, you're not gonna make the same picks as when you don't for the most part.
I also, because I start my preps over there, I also tend to do really well in these early leagues. So
if you do the prep, you can get guys way earlier than you will be able to a couple months from then. And you and I did the First Pitch Arizona League.
That was a nightmare.
Oh my God! I have never drafted within 3 months of that, and here I am doing this draft in freaking October. I'm in second place. I have no idea how, but I'm in second place.
I don't think I will be doing that one again. It's I've done it twice now, and it's been fun. But it's just an extra league that you're drafting before you have any idea where free agents are going, and
there's nothing really on the line. Well, I guess you said you get a free trip to.
I think you get a free. I think you get a free admission. I don't really know. I didn't win.
It doesn't matter for you because you get it for free anyway.
Yeah. So, but is there one guy that you got right this year that you're pumping your chest over, and any guy that you completely missed the boat on?
Here comes the Dansby Swanson talk.
I don't know whether I got Dansby right. It's not like he's crushing it to the extent to which it's like a league winner. It's just that
he's been pretty damn good, honestly. He's now in the lead up, so I mean,
yeah, and the power's probably there to an extent, isn't it? I mean, the speed's a nice bonus, but the way he's going with his power, maybe he's going to get to sort of 25 plus homers, which is going to be nice with 20 steals. No, one guy I got right. I was always pretty hot on. I know Kevin Gossman struggled slightly over the last few weeks, but I think people maybe felt that Gossman was overpriced slightly, and I still think that was a pretty fair value for Gossman, and I always felt that was.
I think that the whole AL East thing scared off a lot of people.
Yeah,
the AL East.
Yeah, I feel like that was a nice price for Gossman, and I got him in quite a few places, and I'm still pretty happy with that. I think he'll turn out to be good value where he was. Annoyingly, there's some people that this is the interesting thing about it, isn't it? When you're drafting 30 players towards the back end of an NFBC, you're coming away with players that they've actually turned out well, but I don't have on my roster anymore for reasons that, so for example, I drafted John Bertie in the 30th round of TGFBI, but he obviously started the season and he wasn't playing. And I stand by the decision to drop him. He was a drop. He was you can't. That's not the wrong decision. No. But it's pretty annoying when you look back now and see the guy that's just got 22 steals on his team. You're like, well, I knew that this guy was valuable in and of himself, but so those ones sort of sting a little bit, I suppose. I mean, I drafted Tyrone Taylor. I dropped him, and he's coming pretty decent right now. The most annoying one this year is Tanner Houck, because I held him, and I was like, this guy does not have a role on this team. And I must have dropped him 2 weeks prior to him becoming the closer. And, I got fairly, well, I didn't get lucky. I spent the dollars to make sure I got Sir Anthony Dominguez, at least as a runner-up prize. So there have been quite a few annoying ones this year that have left the boat, but I want back on the boat.
So you went big on your Phillies closer, eh? You were pretty convinced he had the job.
I think he's got the job most nights. They're match-upping it slightly with Brad Hand, and I know that Andrew Belatti got one last night. That was just a one-off because they weren't available. So I think they'll just use Hand and Dominguez but it'll be Dominguez most nights because it's pretty unusual to sort of line up against 3 lefties in so I think Dominguez is the guy. Yeah,
I'm with you there. I definitely
am too.
In Sir Anthony as well.
Well, he's also just a better pitcher. I mean,
Right.
And that does serve for something.
Absolutely.
Let's talk some news and notes real quick. I want to start with Bryce Harper having a fractured thumb.
Another Philly. Oh boy.
Oh dear.
This is really, really disappointing because he's been injured pretty much the entire season, anyways.
Yeah.
But they've found ways around, keeping him in games and DHing. I haven't seen yet a timeline, Ryan, but if he's going to be out for, let's say, 2 months, are you dropping Bryce Harper?
I don't think the timeline's going to be too pretty. It's close. It's close. It probably depends on what my roster looks like in general. I'm probably going to try and do everything that I can to keep Harper around on my bench, because even if it's a month of him at the end of the season, that's going to be like very valuable. And he's proven time and again that he can produce even when he's pretty banged up. So they'll just DH him probably and he'll be valuable. I suppose there's a scenario in which I might drop him, but I think I'd have to be on a serious roster crunch. And I'm pretty brutal with getting rid of guys. So I would try and keep Harper around, and I've already been brutal dropping loads of other guys. Like, you can get rid of Tyler McGill. You can get rid of pitchers. I think are easier to get rid of, because if they're out for a few weeks or a few months, they need to ramp back up. Then you got to pray that the shoulder or the elbow isn't still a bit of a problem. And then you got to think, well, even when they come back, they're going to be on 4 innings and then 5 innings. And how valuable is that really towards the back end of the season? It's not. So I would, keep Harper.
So I actually just tweeted about this earlier today. I said he's right on the border of a drop and hold for me. Inside Injuries said that he'll be out at least 6 weeks. So for me, two months is a drop at this point in the season, but 4 to 6 weeks is still a hold. Especially when we're talking about hitters, as Ryan was talking about with pitchers, you have more complications because there's more things that can go wrong with their recovery, and also they have to ramp up when they get back. And like Ryan was saying, their first start back, you're not going to want to play them there. They might only go like 60, 70 pitches. Like, it might be 2 or 3 starts back before they're even useful to you. So, but with hitters, you can often get them back and just plug them right back in. And obviously, we're talking about an elite hitter here. We're talking about a guy who's a first-round pick, a guy who could really impact your team, as Ryan said, for like even a month, could still be huge. So for me, I held him for this weekend because I actually have him in Clarf, which really sucks. I was like, I'm not going to drop him yet. I'm going to wait for more information. But now that I know it's 6 weeks, I don't love the at least 6 weeks thing, because that could easily be 8 weeks, but I think right now I'm leaning towards holding him.
Yeah, I think the timeline will largely depend on where the Phillies are at, right? If the Phillies are still in contention as we start getting to that 6 week mark, then
he's a drop then.
Yeah, then he'll likely be rushed back. If they're not, though, like, maybe they address the elbow issue too, and they say, if the Phillies fall out of it, they could just shut him down. I think you got to hold on to him. Jason Stark from I think he's still at ESPN, or no, he's at the Athletic now. He tweeted last night, in Bryce Harper's last 162 games before the injury, he had 42 home runs, was hitting 324 with 17 stolen bases. That's like top player in fantasy numbers. He's and so I have a really hard time dropping a guy like that until we have a really clear timetable. I don't know that we'll have that anytime in the next week or so. So I think you got to hold on to him for at least another week or two with the hopes that he comes back. So
I think it'll be more clear. I don't know if it'll be clear for a few weeks.
Yep.
Well, here's the acid test, Justin. If someone drops him in your TGFBI league this weekend, what percentage of your fab budget are you putting down on him the following week?
Ooh.
No, not much. I would pick him up, but I would not put more than like $20-$25. on him. It's such a huge, I mean, especially rest of the way, like you could be literally lighting that money on fire. Like there, for instance, like I picked up Mitch Haniger in a league, I think last week or the week before. But I only spent $2. Like I'm only going to throw just a tiny bit of money at guys like that because of the high probability that it could be completely wasted. And I mean, if you've got a ton of fab, you can obviously put more at it. I don't have a ton of fab in most of my leagues. Most of my leagues, I'm under, $300 left for the year out of 1,000. So like, I'm not going to spend more than 20 something bucks on anyone unless I really feel they are a game changer now. Bryce Harper could be a game changer in 6 weeks, but in 6 weeks I could be out of it. So I'm saving any big bids rest of the way on guys who I think can help me right now.
Yeah, it's completely circumstantial depending on not just your budget but also your team. Like a lot of teams right now, you're inundated with injuries, and you cannot put yourself in a position where you're going to end up taking zeros just because you're trying to hold someone for a September run. Like, you do not want to sacrifice production now for potential production down the road, no matter how good the player is.
Yeah, for instance, in my TGFBI league specifically, 4 of my bench spots are IL guys right now. Like that's I'm already in. So I mean, I clearly would be dropping one of those guys if I was going to do it, but I'm still not going to spend more than 20 some bucks. Yeah. All right, what about Daniel Hudson? He tears his ACL. He is done for the year. This is a huge bummer because he had been closing off and on, kind of taking over for Kimbrel with Kimbrel's struggles. Last night, Kimbrel came in to save the game in the 10th inning and blew it. He ended up getting the win, but Brusdar Graterol got the save. Dave, do you think it's time to run to the wire, pick up Brusdar Graterol in case Kimbrel continues to struggle?
Not really. I honestly, when you said he got a bunch of saves, I'm like, did he? I guess he got 5. Hudson, that is. I don't think Kimbrel was ever really in danger of losing the role. I mean, kind of. I know he's had his struggles, but like they really want him to be the guy. And I don't think he's doing like terribly. And like last night, it was a situation where it was an extra inning, so the guy started on second base. So yes, he technically blew it, but he gave up like a single, which shouldn't be enough to blow a save in a normal circumstance. But in this, it was. They babied him early on, and I think they don't want to use him on like back-to-back days and stuff like that. So if you're in like a super deep league and you want to play a guy who could get the occasional save, you could roll with Graterol, but he actually hasn't been that good this year overall. I know he's got like ridiculous stuff, but I'm pretty sure he's been subpar this year. Like a 4 ERA. Strikeout rate is sub 8K per 9. Nothing super special there from Graterol. Honestly, their bullpen is kind of a mess. So yeah, it was a bit of a blow. It was definitely a blow to the Dodgers to lose Hudson like that. But I was never really counting on him for fantasy production, to be honest.
Ryan, what about you? Are you picking up Graterol in leagues, or are you kind of staying away from that situation?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with Dave. I think that Kimbrel's still getting his strikeouts, so I'm assuming that he's still missing bats, and he'll probably stay in the role unless there's a sort of a serious blow up. Even then, I'm not sure it's Graterol's. He's been okay, like Dave says, not great. Those are the guys. I mean, they might at that point they might just start going matchups. They might use Alex Vessier as well, who's a pretty damn good pitcher. So no, I'd stay away from it. I'm hoping that in most leagues I've got closers that I'm trying to avoid chasing these sort of pipe dream closers that might get the odd save here and there and otherwise might just blow up your ratios because they're not even that good.
All right. I kind of agree with you guys. I think the Dodgers are going to address this bullpen here at the trade deadline. I think if Kimbrel does lose it, it's because they've brought someone else in that's more reliable. Whether
I don't see that as likely. I mean, he's got a 2.8 Sierra. I mean, he's not doing badly.
He's struggled with mechanics this year a few times, so I would not be surprised either way, honestly. But Sal Perez, he has torn the UCL in his thumb, so this is a different UCL than the one in the elbow that causes you to get Tommy John. But he's going to miss some time. What are you doing with Sal Perez there, Ryan?
That looks like it's going to be a long time, and that's a catcher. That's someone that, well, I personally, I'm lucky I never paid that price for Sal Perez anyway. I thought that was crazy, but that's sort of by the by. If you do have him, the advice is, say goodbye. Make sure you're getting, we talk. You need your lineup slots to be active. You need people that can come in and help. I mean, just this weekend, I cover my middle infield slot on TGFBI with Rugner Odor and Brandon Crawford, and Odor's day to day and hasn't played for a week, and Crawford goes on the IL. So what? I have decisions to make. I have to move people. So if I can ship someone like Perez out, I'll see you later.
What about you, Dave? I think you are highly invested in Sal Perez this year. One, what are you doing? Are you cutting and moving on to someone else? And two, of all the kind of high-priced catchers this year that a lot of people in the industry were kind of saying you should be going after, most of them have been pretty disappointing in terms of what you paid for them in their production. Is this going to shift the kind of thought process away from that in the future?
Yeah, and my thought process has always been don't take early catchers. This year, what happened was I was looking at the catcher pool and thinking, it's such a huge advantage to have a guy who plays every single day at catcher over most of the guys who actually don't, and early in our process, Justin, we were talking about Will Smith. And then as I looked into it more, I was like, you know what? It doesn't look like he's going to be playing every day. And his price was just way too high for me. So in some leagues, I wouldn't say I'm highly invested. I had maybe 3 shares of Sal Perez as 16 teams. That's certainly more invested than I wish I were. But there was a couple times where he fell to the 4th round and I convinced myself to take him, and I shouldn't have. It was just a thing where I thought I was going to get an advantage that I could use at catcher. That, looking back on it, I always say this, catchers are involved in every single play. They're so injury prone because everything, like a foul tip, a bat could hit you, the ball could bounce into your fingers. I mean, there's just so many things that can happen to you when you're catching that makes it so easy to get hurt, that investing in early catchers is a bad play. Usually the kind of guys going in the 6th to 8th round guy, who could play every day, like Wilson Contreras this year. I have a lot of him, and like Sal Perez last year. Go ahead, Ryan.
Dave, were you influenced by standing gains points? Are you using them? Because I know that, and those books and theories are absolutely, sublime, by the way. And I know that Tanner Bell's had loads of success with it and released his book, which is glorious. But the catchers like Sal Perez come out big books on standing gains points. Is that something that influenced you?
I am a little ashamed to admit I didn't really know much about standing gains points until this year, like this offseason before this year started, and it was fascinating. I think I listened to Tanner Bell maybe on Rob's podcast, Pull Hitter Pod, and I think that's might have been where I'd heard about it, but I never really knew what it was. But I did know from Toby that these catchers were 1st round values, but I kind of do that stuff in my head. I knew that because I look at the replacement value and I look at what Sal Perez did, and you're talking about most people's catchers being nowhere in the same stratosphere as Sal Perez last year. So it's pretty easy to see if you're getting that big of an advantage from one player to another. One guy's got Sal Perez and someone else is starting who I can't even think, but Austin Hedges or something like that. It's the difference is massive to a point where obviously you can see that he could be a 1st round value, but it's so difficult for these guys to repeat, A, and B, to stay healthy, that it's not a good idea.
Yeah, I tend to like to play in the middle of the pack in catcher. I don't want the guys who are going to be at the end of a draft that are Baseball HQ does articles on this like every year, like that the guys who are drafted late at catcher offer your team negative value. They're actively hurting you in your lineup each week. I don't want those guys, but I'm not going to spend a top 100 pick. Yeah, I won't spend a top 100 pick on a catcher unless I feel like in a real elite one like Real Muto drops, because I mean we've even seen it with Real Muto, right? Like Real Muto hasn't been amazing this year, but in the past he's been a guy who can be really, really good, but he also gets nicked up, like Dave said. Like catchers get hurt. It is the position with the most amount of contact on a baseball field in a sport that's not supposed to have contact, right? So these guys just get beat up a lot more. And so I did end up with a fair share of Contreras and Grandal. Contreras has been fine. Grandal has not been fine. So, but I also end up with guys like Danny Jansen and Alejandro Kirk and guys like that. MJ Melendez is on a few of my teams as well. It's a bummer. The only report I see on the timeline is that he's going to miss 8 weeks, which I think makes him droppable in most formats where you can't reserve him.
And I know you asked this and I didn't answer. I did drop him in the fab leagues that I have him in.
I didn't want to pick up a guy that hit 48 home runs. That's 21 more home runs than he's ever hit before. Like immediately in my head, I'm thinking someone's paying something for something that ain't ever going to happen again. That is not going to happen. Well, I know that sounds simplistic, but I just thought, nah, there's no way that I'll draft this guy.
Right. No, I think if you were paying like by value last year, I think he would have been a top 6 pick or something like that. Like,
he was a first round pick.
Of course,
but we went through this a few years ago with Gary Sanchez, where Gary Sanchez was a top, a first round pick or a borderline first round pick in leagues because of what he was able to do at the catcher position, and then he fell off completely. Not saying that we thought that Perez would necessarily fall off completely, but there was definitely some regression due, and he hasn't been the healthiest of guys necessarily. The Royals play him a ton, right? He has missed time over the last few years, and I don't feel like that was talked about enough. I talked about it. He was my biggest fade at catcher.
He takes 1 walk for every 7 strikeouts as well. I mean, it's ever a profile for someone that could fall off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, you weren't paying. The thing is, you weren't paying for that production by taking him. Like he's usually going in the, I would like 3rd round to 4th round. I think all my shares were 4th round shares, and you certainly weren't paying for his previous year's production by taking him in the 4th round. You were getting quite a big discount as it was, because nobody was really buying that he's going to hit 50 home runs again. He didn't have.
You were definitely getting a discount if he repeated what he did. The thing was, you were still paying for him at a price in which you needed him to be very good.
Yeah,
you were also paying a price, guys, that no one in the entire fantasy community had ever suggested that he was ever worth before in his entire career. No, if you'd have said it prior to the 48 home run season that Sal Perez was a 4th round fantasy pick, you would have been laughed out of the arena. If you'd have said this 18 months ago, people would have thought that you'd been smoking, right?
But Justin, I do take issue with your thing with him being hurt. No, he's been extremely healthy, other than 2019, which he missed, which I thought was that his eye issue or something?
No,
else?
that was in 2020. He missed time in 2018, 2019.
You're talking 500 plus plate appearances every single season other than 2019 from 2013 on. So no, he was the picture of health. Grandal was the guy who I faded big time based on health history. When you've got a catcher who's got bad everything, but knees, hips, it's that was the one guy that was going early that I was avoiding because of injury risk.
I mean, he had a tear in his MCL in 2018. He had a knee injury in 2016.
Almost 2018.
He got hurt in 2017. I'm just going through his Twitter timeline of Sal Perez hurt, and I'm finding all these injuries. Now, yes, he had a lot of plate appearances because the Royals used him full time as a catcher, but he was still missing time. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they were also letting him catch an obscene amount of games too. And at some point, your body's going to break down doing that as well. Like that isn't necessarily the case this time, but
in terms of health for catchers, he was pretty up there in terms of you could count on him for 130 plus games in most situations. But like we said before, they're involved in every play. Anything can happen, and something did. So it was still bad.
What round is Sal Perez going next season?
Ooh.
It depends on where he finished. Like if he finishes, like if he comes back and he's good, like
sixth round, I would say.
Yeah, I think he goes back into like the 8th round where he was, I think, last year.
I don't think he's gonna go back quite that far. I would say 7th, maybe.
It depends. Like it depends
only because you're drafting.
I think it completely depends.
I'm a buyer.
If he misses 8 weeks, we're now talking about the end of August. If he comes back and he's good in September, then a lot will be forgiven. If he comes back in or does not come back, which is a huge possibility because the Royals will be out of it, then he's going to drop considerably.
Yeah. Well, they're not going to rush us for sure.
Yeah. Aroldis Chapman potentially is going to be activated this week. Do you guys think he goes back to closing or is this going to be an ease-in thing? Dave, are you putting Aroldis Chapman back in your lineups?
Yeah, I do have a fair amount of Chapman, and it was because I knew if he got removed, if he struggled, they would put him back in as closer. And I argued with Gecko about this on Twitter and some other people who were like, oh, no, Clay Holmes is doing so well. And I keep trying to tell people it doesn't matter how good you are. It matters what the manager wants. And the manager has made it clear, Boone has made it clear, he wants Chapman closing. And he actually came out and said Chapman will go back to closing in most spots. I do still think that Holmes is worth holding on to for sure. I do think he'll get some saves here and there, but he has a lot more value to the team as a fireman. He is their best reliever. They want to be able to use him in a number of situations that occur before the 9th inning. And so they want Chapman to be that guy who can just shut the door. So I haven't seen him. I don't know. I've heard his minor league rehab, like his numbers are okay, like they're good. I need to see him how he looks versus major leaguers. I am starting him in 1 or 2 places where I need to start him. Everywhere else, I'm in like a wait and hold kind of situation where I just want to see how this week goes. Plus, they said he should be back this week. I've learned to read between the lines. That does not necessarily mean he will be back this week. So again, I also tweeted about this today. I said, if you can afford to leave him on your bench for this week, do. But if you're desperate for saves and you've been waiting for him, I get it. You can put him back in. It's not the worst play, but personally, I'm trying to keep him benched where I can for 1 week.
Ryan, are you putting Chapman back in your lineups this week if you have him?
Probably. I mean, hopefully, if it was his Achilles, right? I assume that he's that doesn't worry me as much as if it was in his arm somewhere. And a worst case scenario is even if Holmes does close, then you just got to hope that Chapman doesn't blow you up in the week that you put him into your lineup, which he probably won't. So I'll put him in.
Yeah, I think I've only got him in TGFBI, and I will be putting him back into my lineup because my other options are a 2-start week for Zach Davies, which I think are at the Dodgers and at the Rockies, and then or Madison Bumgarner home versus the Padres who kill lefties. So I'm going to probably put Chapman back in the lineup this week and just pray for the best. But I agree with Dave, and Dave and I talked about this, I think, a week or 2 ago, and we both were in agreement back then that we thought that Chapman was going to get the job back. So this is not surprising to us, hopefully not surprising to anybody listening to this podcast as well. The Yankees have a full week of games. They've got 3 against Oakland, the random Thursday game at Houston, and then 3 games at the Cleveland Guardians. So they've got a full 7 game lineup. Hopefully Chapman can pull up a save or 2 for you guys. Yeah. Let's talk about some players who are being picked up in a number of leagues. I want to know if it's time for you guys, if you guys think it's time to pick them up. Let's start with Edward Olivares, who has been kind of a fantasy darling as a quote-unquote sleeper for a while. He's a guy of mine that I've been a big fan of for a long time. Was starting to play more before getting injured, and then was activated over the weekend. And in his first game back, hit 2 home runs, and it was a very popular fab pickup this weekend. Ryan, are you picking up Edward Olivares?
I would do if I needed speed somewhere. It's not a bad option. Again, it's always dependent on your lineup. I haven't actually picked him up anyway. I'm not like super excited. He's had 242 at bats in the majors. He has a 1-to-5 walk to K ratio during that time. So there's no guarantee that this is not going to be a guy that just completely flunks out your batting average. And he probably will do that with below average power as well. I don't think there's going to be too much pop coming with that back. So for me, this is more of a let's hope that the Royals are out of things. They let him steal bags. They don't really care what he's doing on the bases. It's a perfect team for that. So if you need speed, fine. Otherwise, I'll probably leave it.
Dave, are you an Olivares fan?
I am an Olivares fan. I wish the Royals were an Olivares fan.
Yeah, that's another problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He got sent down 8 times last year. Like, you can't roster him without having some PTSD that he's just going to get sent down in the middle of, like, a hot streak. Like, what else can that guy do? I mean, he's dominated in the minors. I mean, 2018 he had 12 homers, 21 steals. Then 2019, 18 homers, 35 steals. And, that's what everybody sees. And they're like, oh, God, if he can just do that in Kansas City. And Kansas City was usually a place where people came up and they ran. I forget, someone pointed it out to me, but ever since Mondesi went down, the Royals haven't really run a ton this year. Like, Witt's running, but it was you. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, Witt's running, but the rest of the Royals, not a ton. He does have 2 steals, though, already in just 50 plate appearances, Olivares. So,
But that was prior.
It was prior.
Injury. Yeah.
That is true. That is true. And like you said, he did hit 2. Like, when he hit those 2 home runs, I'm like, oh my God, his fab price just went way, way up. I mean, most of us who, if you're going to pick him up, you probably picked him up the week before. Like, if you didn't want to spend a ton on him, which I did in a couple of leagues, but I left him on the wire in a few leagues. He does have some pop. Like, he's not just a speed play. He's probably like a 20-25 guy in a full season. Maybe he might even have more power than that, honestly. But I don't know. I don't know if they're going to give him run. I don't know what's going to happen. He's not a guy that I would go nuts for just because I have that uncertainty that they could just pull the rug out from under him at any point. But he's definitely worth picking up, in my opinion. He's the kind of guy who can kind of go crazy in a short amount of time and really help your team, I think.
Yeah, he doesn't walk very much, which is like perfect for the Royals, right? Because the Royals just love these guys who hate to walk. They just want him to swing. They don't want you to just watch a pitch go by.
So many of them. Sal Perez.
Yeah, just these guys that don't walk at all. Here's the thing: he makes a lot of contact. I mean, he's a guy who's got a 87% zone contact rate this year. The problem is the launch angle is 1 degree. Or 1.7 degrees. So I don't expect him to hit for much power, even though I think there is some pretty decent raw power in his bat. I think he's more like, probably like a 10 to 15 homer guy over the course of a full season.
Now, in the 200 prior plate appearances, his launch angle was like 7.5% to 8%.
That's still not ideal, though. Like that is,
Right. And do you think that the 1 degree in 50 plate appearances is more indicative of that than or do you think that you're just
he's probably like a 7-8% guy, but you want a guy who's at least 12 degree. You want a guy who's at least 12 plus degrees, right? You're hoping a guy is closer to a 15 degree launch angle. He's not even half of that. More than likely. So I just don't think that there's going to be a ton of home runs or power rest of the way. What I do think there could be is speed. If they do decide to start running, I mean, this could be a matter of they've stopped running as much because they don't have the personnel who could run as much now that Mondesi was gone. So this just may be a matter of, hey, we have a slower team with Mondesi gone, so we're going to slow it down. Now with Olivares back, do they let him run? I'm really watching over the next week and seeing where he's hitting in the lineup, because where he started in the lineup when he came back was the 8th spot. And that was against a lefty, which is where he really excels. But prior to the injury, he was hitting leadoff a lot. If he starts moving his way back up the lineup, then I think you've got someone who could hit for a pretty decent average and get you some speed and not be a zero in the power department. I agree with Dave. I think this is a guy you want to pick up just on the upside play alone. But there is, I mean, they literally instituted a rule because of him this year, right? It's the Edward Olivares rule. A team can only send a player down to the minors 5 times in a season now because they sent him down so much. So the team obviously has a love-hate relationship with this guy because they hate him enough to send him down to the minors a bunch, but they also bring him back up. They don't let him just sit there down there forever necessarily. So I'm hoping that this is his time. I think he has a lot of talent. I do kind of wish he was in a different organization, but I think the Royals have no reason to not give him some real run here and see what they've got in a guy like him. And if he's a building block for the future, along with some other bright spots. Speaking about a guy who may be a building block of the future on a team that has been sending him up and down, is Jarren Duran. He's starting to play really well. The question is, Dave, are they going to send Jarren Duran back down? Is he going to be worth rostering?
Man, I don't even know. Here's what I've seen. So last week in Glarf, 2 weeks ago I picked him up for like $1, and then the next week, assuming Kike was coming back and reclaiming his spot because Duran had only been up a couple of games, and I had read from their beat writers and some other people who are in the area who know the Red Sox better than I do, and they said, yeah, Duran's going to be going right back down as soon as Kike is ready. Well, then Kike had a setback or a setback. I don't know if they're changing their mind. I doubt it, because he's so bad defensively. Like, that's the thing I hear from everybody is Duran's defense is just atrocious. So, they could play him over JBJ, but I've heard from everybody that they're not going to do that because JBJ is so good defensively, and they really like their defense with Kike and JBJ there. So, yeah, Kike could come back. They're saying he should be back this week at some point, but they've said that before. So, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if they bring Duran back up or if they leave him up, if he'd just be like a fourth there, or if they have a rotation going between them or something. Like, if they're not going to play him over JBJ or Kike, then I don't know what they're doing. So all I can tell you is if you have him, hold him for now, but definitely don't be shocked if they send him back down too.
What about you, Ryan? Do you have any faith that the Red Sox are going to commit to Duran?
No real faith in it. No, I like what I'm seeing in terms of the speed. And there's some signs of some pop there in the bat as well, like in recent times. So it looks like the Red Sox again it's a nice environment for someone with his skill set. So it's a real shame if he doesn't get the playing time. But I'm probably not going out of my way to spend more than a few bucks, maybe $15. And if I get him, great. If I don't, I'm probably not going to lose any sleep.
Yeah, the problem is they just don't have enough guys with options left. I mean, their bench right now is Kevin Pilecki, who's a backup catcher, and he's not, so he's not really in the conversation. But they just added Yolmer Sanchez to the roster because Duran has to go on the restricted list because he's unvaccinated, and they're going to Toronto. You've got Christian Arroyo, who they really like, also out of option. Rob Refsnyder out of options. Like Duran's like really the only guy, him and Franchi Cordero are the only two guys that can go down, and Cordero plays first base as well. So when they don't want to put Dahlbeck in the lineup, they can put Cordero at first base. So I think he's going to end up going back. I think he will be back at some point this season, probably after the trade deadline when the Red Sox decide to sell. It'll be up for good. But I think you're going to have to wait for that. And that's the really frustrating reason why I haven't been trying to get him in Fab and would not as well. Let's talk about Oh, go ahead.
It's just kind of a shame that Duran isn't on the Royals. I feel like if you'd have asked me about Duran and he was on the Royals, then I'd have been like a bit more excited than I am personally. More excited about Duran than I am about Olivieras. I just feel like Duran really is the kind of guy that could, these 2 steal games are just coming. The speed is. He's an exciting player, But yeah. We have to be pragmatic, and he isn't on the Royals. He's on the Red Sox, and that means it's kind of hard to roster him right now.
Absolutely. Tyler Wells has quietly put together a really nice season. He's got a 3.34 ERA, not getting a ton of strikeouts, but the new kind of dimensions of Orioles Park is really helping him be successful. He was kind of a more active pickup this week in leagues. Ryan, where are you at on Tyler Wells?
Well, here's another guy that I drafted in the last 5 rounds of TGFBI and dropped, but actually he found a way back onto my roster later on in the year. So he's been real nice. The drop in strikeouts is strange in some ways, but you always have to be, it's been quite dramatic, but you always have to be prepared for some drop off when a guy transitions from pitching out of the bullpen to pitching in a starting role. So he's obviously going to have to find himself as a new pitcher. It's an entirely different role. It's been a very stark drop-off in the strikeout rate, and I would imagine that will probably uptick. I don't think that this sort of 5.6 K per 9 is who he is. I think the strikeouts will probably start to come as well. Said that, I don't really think his whip and his control is in a good place. I don't think his control is quite as good as his whip suggests either. So I think this is probably as good as it'll get, and you're going to get some rough starts in with the bad starts, but he is a very rosterable pitcher right now who's had a good start to the season, but I'm not super excited about rostering him. I'm happy to have him around because he's steady.
What about you, Dave? You got any interest in Tyler Wells?
I don't think more strikeouts are coming. He's got a sub 10% swing strike rate. I think a lot of guys just go from getting strikeouts as relievers to then, as starters. It doesn't really work the same way because you have to scale back your velocity and, you have to add others that maybe aren't as good as the 2 pitches that you used as a reliever, and you just don't get as many swing and misses. And I think he's fine as a streamer against certain offenses, but I think, we see these guys, they're good until they're not, right? Like Brad Keller looked great for like a month, and then he started getting lit up. That's going to happen to Tyler Wells too. He's going to get lit up by someone multiple times. I mean, unless he's Martin Perez, like that's the only guy so far who's like really looking like he can perform at this low strikeout rate level. Most of the low strikeout rate guys, Greinke, all these guys, like they all eventually get lit up, and it's going to happen to Wells too. But I think he's a guy you can stream against weak offenses, and that's how I would use him.
Yeah, I mean, since he's become a starter, out of the relief role into a starter, his fastball velocity is down like 1.5 miles. And it's weird because we've seen it tick up like for multiple games at a time. He had like a 4-game stretch where he was over 94 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden it drops back down 93, 92. He also completely changed around his pitch mix this year, which is a little weird and concerning, that he went from a guy who had a pretty good slider in the bullpen that he was throwing 25+% of the time to now it doesn't seem like it's got much bite on it. And he's throwing it less than 10% of the time, so it's barely being used in the same capacity that it was previously.
What are you looking at StatCast? Because on Fangraphs it says
I'm on Fangraphs.
Fangraphs says 25% for his slider.
For unless I'm looking at a different player, no, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm seeing on Fangraphs right here.
So. Oh, you must be looking at something else, man. I'm just looking at his slider percentage. On the, I don't know.
I am as well, and it says 8.5%. So we'll have to
just the classification of pitches.
It could be. I see his cutter at 25%.
I don't know. I'm seeing slider. I don't know.
I'll say this though. I don't think the comparison to Brad Keller is necessarily fair. I mean, even just to look at Tyler Wells. He did start games in the minors. He's done this before. He's not always exclusively been a reliever, and he has shown that he does have control. His career whip and look at minor league stats, fine, and it's going to be harder in the majors, but his career whip in the minors is 1.06. That's through 255 minor league innings. Now, obviously, there could be an element of luck to that, but that's still 255 career innings. And Brad Keller went through the minors with a 1.35 whip. So I don't really think that this is a guy that we should necessarily take off our radar entirely. I would just keep watching, is all I'm saying. I think there's some talent there.
I think there's some talent, too. I just wonder if because of the loss of velocity, his pitches aren't playing as well. I did go over to Savant, and Savant has him listed as a 25% slider guy. So I don't know why that's coming up so different for me.
Thing like because like literally on Fangraphs slider percentage is 24.9%. So I don't know where you are.
We'll discuss that I guess later, but I don't know why. I don't know where I'm looking at this. I'm looking at his pitch type on Fangraphs, but like I said, Savant's got him at Savant has him as a 24.9% slider.
Partially has to do with control, but also the amount of time.
Say that again, Dave. You're breaking up a little.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, whip certainly has to do with control some, but it also how much getting hit. Like Keller has pretty good control. It's just he gets hit a lot. But Zach Greinke is a guy who has really, really like elite control, but he just gets hit so much and doesn't strike out enough guys.
Sure, and obviously whip is an outcome. It isn't a skill. So I would go behind and you're quite right to be looking at the pitch mix and to be thinking about swinging strike rates and velocity and all the rest of it. But it's a nice place to start. I mean, what I can do with whip, I can go back to their minor league careers and I can go, Brad Keller's probably a guy that I am never going to have on any of my teams because when he was in the minors, he had a 1.35 whip. And that makes me think that unless I'm seeing something behind the scenes, that he's probably going to have a 1.5 whip in the majors, So it's just that starting point for me before I dig a little bit deeper. And the starting point tells me that Wells is someone that I at least want to check out.
I think it's a lot.
Sorry, breaking news. Vinny Pasquantino has just been called up. Finally.
I'll get there. I'll get there in a second and just finish out on Wells. I think if the velocity comes back up to where he was sitting at 95, then you've got a guy. Because right now his fastball is getting hit around. Last year it had about a 184 batting average against. This year it has a 270 batting average against with an X batting average of 328 against. And I think that's a lot to do with the lack of velocity. Guys are able to catch up to it just a lot more easily when it's sitting at 93. So, yes, Vinny Pasquantino is being called up by the Royals. Our friend Rupert from Scotland has informed us of that. Is he a must-add there, Dave?
I would say yes. This is a guy with elite plate discipline and power to back it up. Not to mention he's been on a hot streak. He's been on an absolute tear in the minors all season. So, he's a guy who granted, he is in Kansas City, which is not a friendly park for hitters, but he's still going to produce. And he's a guy who I want to own everywhere, and I've been holding for several weeks in even shallow leagues. So, yes, I think he's a must-add.
Yeah, this is a bummer for me. I almost picked him up, but I picked up Estuary Ruiz and Tout this week instead. And so that one hurts a little bit. I should have picked up Pasquantino. Ryan, what about you? Are you going to the wires and grabbing Pasquantino?
Yeah, I mean, if I need batting average, definitely, and if it's an OPS league, definitely. I mean, 64 walks to go along with like 64 strikeouts in this season so far. That's elite, and that will transfer because that. To me, that just shows that he has a batting eye that's an elite level. So, yeah, I like him. The interesting thing is that I'm doing quite well in hitting in most of my leagues. So maybe finding room or sort of making sense that that's where I want to spend my fab. I don't know. So, yeah, Maybe I need to drop Tyler Wells and get some better pitchers.
I would recommend that. Carlos Santana also got traded to the Mariners, apparently.
Okay, I was just about to say, because I was looking at roster resource, I didn't see Carlos Santana on there. I was like, did he get DFA'd? So he was traded to the Mariners, you said?
Yeah,
it makes me wonder how long Ty France is going to be out for.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I thought it was going to be like at least 3 weeks, but probably closer to 4 to 5. That's what I'm thinking for France.
Okay. Let's talk about Esteury Ruiz, who is a guy I just mentioned. So we'll bump him up the rundown a little bit. He has just been on fire in the minor leagues. Now I know, Dave, you play in a lot of NFBC where you can pick up guys until they're actually called up and played a game. So I'll start with Ryan on this one. Is Ruiz a guy that you're picking up and stashing right now? Because like I said, I just picked him up and stashed him in Tout Wars.
I don't know where he's going to fit in. I don't. Is he going to play every day on this Padres team? Like, they got a lot of good players. I look fantasy wise, prospect wise, that's the profile that I've always gone for. I mean, he's got some power and he's got a hell load of speed, so he's really exciting. If he comes up, he could be an impact player. I would just be worried that I don't know whether that's going to be this season, and it might just be a bit part role. I can't see him being an everyday player. I don't know about you guys.
Dave, do you think they can find a spot for him as an everyday player in San Diego?
I mean, I'm not the right person to ask this question. I have no idea. I recently learned of who he was. I didn't know who Esteury. I mean, I had heard the name Esteury Ruiz. He obviously looks like a great power speed combo guy with emphasis on the speed part of that equation. But I don't know. Like they've got Abrams up now, and then Tatis is supposedly coming back at some point until he blows out his shoulder and then goes out again. But I don't know. I don't know where they would play him. I mean, Kim is struggling, but once Tatis is back, I assume they make him a utility player and then let Abrams play unless Abrams flops. So I don't know. For me, he's not. I mean, if you're in a league like a keeper that has minor leaguers, he's already owned. And everywhere else, like I'm not picking him up to hold him in Fantrax or anything like that or Yahoo.
I picked him up on the upside. I mean, Kim has been garbage. Let's just be honest. As much as I liked Kim coming over from the KBO, he's been absolutely garbage. Trent Grisham has been absolutely garbage and is dealing with a back issue right now. Nomar Mazara is not anything special. And this is a Padres team that is in a hell of a dogfight in the NL.
I missed that he plays outfield too. I thought he was just a middle infielder. He also
he can play second or outfield. He's been playing some outfield in the minor league. So it's a little bit of a gamble, especially because in Tout Wars, they have an awful rule. I mean, I love Tout Wars, but I just hate this rule that if you pick someone up, they have to go immediately into your lineup. So I've got to take a 0 this week in order to pick him up, but I've been playing Cesar Hernandez there, so it's almost like taking a 0 anyways. And my offense has been really, really good anyways. So, but I'm taking the gamble. The speed, I think, is game-changing if he does come up, and he's been hitting so well at some point they're going to have to give him a shot. So I think if you can stash him, and you obviously don't have to put him in your lineup, I think he is worth picking up because he just has a massive amount of speed and he's not a 0 in the power department. And I think there is a decent hit tool there as well. So a former top prospect that kind of lost a little bit of the pedigree because he's been slow to get to the majors. But I think now is the time that he's going to get there. Isaac Paredes has been super, super frustrating for me this year because he had that big 3-homer game earlier in the season. People like me rushed to the waiver wire, and then he wasn't playing very much, and he was sucking when he was playing. Drop him. He has another huge, 3-homer game in the last week. Is Isaac Paredes someone we're picking up and playing? I'll start with you, Dave.
I don't know. So some things look a little different. Like he is hitting the ball harder. His max EV is higher than it's ever been, and his hard hit percentage is higher. His barrel percentage is way higher. Granted, he hasn't had a ton of time in the majors, so we're not basing it on a lot to begin with. So it could be him just developing. He is 23 years old. I think it's worth speculating on. I wouldn't go big on him, though. I'm not convinced that this is something that can stick because sometimes a hot streak looks like real tangible growth, so we don't really know until we've seen them for a while. So it's one of those situations where you pick him up and hope it is, but I mean, he's got a 10% line drive rate, which is not good for the average. I mean, he's hitting 255, but his expected average is like 220. So he does have a 203 BABIP with that too, though. So there is that. All I can say is I don't know yet. I think you play him while he's hot, and if he cools down for a week or two, you probably just move on.
What about you, Ryan? You pick up Isaac Paredes?
Probably not. It feels strange. He's never hit more than 15 home runs in a single season before, throughout his whole career, and he's hit 10 in like 100 plate appearances. So there's some red flags that would have to be not just skill growth. That would have to be skill growth beyond what is plausible. So I think there's got to have been a bit of luck involved in what's occurred so far this season. And he takes a lot of walks, but his batting average isn't great. I mean, I'd have to dig a little bit deeper. I don't know what his contact rate's like, but so I'd probably be more interested in like a league that counts on base percentage.
Is pretty good. 85%.
Contact rate's good. Okay, yeah.
85% contact rate, 92% zone contact rate. I will say this, Ryan. I agree with you with the whole, coming out of nowhere with red flags, but usually for me, that's more in your late 20s, 30s, stuff like that. He is only 23 years old, so looking at his past, he hasn't played in the majors that much. Like it is still in that developmental phase where he could be legitimately gaining in his skills still, I think.
Yeah, and last year he only hit 12 home runs, but that was in like 270 play appearances, something like that. So that does suggest that it's like at least mid-20s home run power. So there's obviously some power in the bat, and he's okay. But the other problem is he plays for the Rays, and what are the Rays doing from week to week? Like do they like Taylor Walls? Like they seem to like Taylor Walls one week, and then they don't the next, and then they like Paredes. I don't know what's going on with this team. And Franco's back, of course, which is good news for everyone who just likes baseball. So I don't really like Rays beyond Franco and like McClanahan.
that is fair.
And I think that's the biggest point. I like Paredes actually a lot. He was a top 75 prospect not that long ago. Anytime the Rays go after kind of a failed or struggling prospect, that's always like a good sign for me.
Yeah.
I love their development, their organizational development. But I don't trust the Rays from a playing time perspective. And now that Wander Franco is back, does Paredes playing time takes hits because they do like to play a lot of guys. They like to platoon. They like to move things around. Brandon Lau will be back at some point. I know he's working his way back right now. So I don't know that the playing time is going to be plentiful in the future. I think he's a guy that you ride for right now, that he is hot. And once that playing time starts to dry up or he starts to struggle, then you move on to kind of the next guy. So I don't want to be overly invested in him necessarily. Like I don't want to spend a bunch of money on him in Fab, but he's a little stopgap option. And I do think that there is some talent, especially in the hit tool in that bat. I don't know that he's a huge power source, but I think he's got decent power and a pretty good hit tool on a team that values that hit tool and doesn't have a lot of it right now outside of Wander Franco, to be honest. This is not the way a Rays team usually conducts itself at the plate. So maybe Paredes kind of endears himself to the organization a little bit because he is more of that traditional Rays kind of batting tool first kind of guy. Luis Patino, speaking of the Rays, he is working his way back and people are starting to stash him. Ryan, what are your thoughts on Patino? Is he a guy that you'd be stashing right now?
Oh, I love the pitcher. I love the player. But stashing arms is not really my it's not really my bag. Having said that, I did hold on to Edward Cabrera through sort of thought maybe this will just be a 2 or 3 week thing. So every now and again I keep someone around who's on the bench that I think can make an impact. Patino can make an impact if you need strikeouts, especially I find pitching through the year with injuries, with niggles, with people working their way back up. I think this is the hardest part of fantasy baseball. For me, this is harder than saves. I can find saves. I can figure out which guy. I can do a bit of fab. I can do hitting. I can crush hitting. I can sort it out if I don't have steals after the draft, but I need some pitching. If you get this wrong, like if you just pick up the wrong guy with the wrong injury at the wrong time, you can be done pretty quickly. And I just don't. I guess the point is, I'd be worried if I picked up Patino. Even though he's a really, really good, if not great pitcher, I'd be worried. So I probably wouldn't do it. Maybe I'm missing on something.
What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's an option for them. I don't think they're gonna just plug him back in because they got Rasmussen back now, coming back soon. I think it's more likely that he goes back in the rotation because then he would be their fifth. It's quite possible that they'll need someone again at some point. I know he did throw 78 pitches in his last outing, but this guy's only thrown 2/3 of an inning so far this year. So I don't think they have no reason to push him. Like I think they're gonna baby him. I don't think he's gonna if you're holding him thinking he's gonna go right back in the rotation when he's back. I don't think that's a good idea. I think he's someone that you'd only stash if you have a large bench where you can afford to wait on him.
I love Luis Patino. I was super, super high on him coming into the season. Unfortunately, injuries derailed him, and I dropped him in pretty much all the spots I had him in, where I was allowed to drop guys, outside of draft and holds. And the problem is I don't know what the Rays are going to do with him because they, like Dave just mentioned, they've got Rasmussen coming back, but they also want to limit Rasmussen's innings. I could see these guys working in tandem, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, because they've done that in the past, they've, kind of paired guys up that they're worried about their innings. I think these would be perfect kind of, two guys to pair up as different pitchers. The problem is then you want the guy who's coming in second. And I don't know which guy that's going to be. So one of them could be extremely valuable if they're regularly the follower out of these two. I don't know which guy that's going to be. I tend to believe that they'll start with a lefty and then go to the righty, but they could go either way, honestly. So I like Patino. I like the skills. If you do have a spot where you can stash him, I don't think it's a bad option because I think you'll know pretty quickly through his first time through a rotation what their plans are. But he could also be worthless. If he's just going to throw 3 innings at the beginning of the game, like that doesn't have any value in fantasy. Right. So be ready for this is another one of these guys like we were talking about earlier. Like, would I pick up, Bryce Harper or pick up, guys who are injured right now? I'm fine doing it if I have the room to stash a guy, but I don't want to overly overspend on it either. Like I don't want to, I've already made that mistake once this season where I spent $80 on Eduardo Rodriguez and then he never came back and had to drop him this week to make room for a $2 pitcher. I can't remember who I picked up, but so I mean, lesson learned. I'm not doing that again. Let's finish out with Jake Myers. He came back off the IL, and I believe they sent down Chase McCormick as well. So it looks like he's going to get plenty of time in that Astros outfield. Dave, are you excited for Jake Myers?
I mean, if you're looking for an outfield, like a 5th outfielder on your team or whatever, I think you can definitely do worse. He's a combo guy. He's got 20, 25 homer power with 10 to 12 steals maybe in a full season. He's got some contact issues, though. This is a guy who does strike out a lot. He struck out close to 31% in 2021 in the majors. And then, this year he's at a 50% rate in 10 plate appearances. So he's not going to be that bad, obviously. I think you're not depending on him for average. He's more of a guy you're just hoping can get hot and give you some homers and steals. He's not a guy I'd go big on. He's going to hit at the bottom of the lineup, but it is a really good Astros lineup. So he could definitely have some value there.
What about you, Ryan? Are you investing in Myers?
Probably not. Pretty uninspiring, isn't it? I don't. Yeah, he could. The problem with a guy like that, it could just be a batting average drain as well, and it's going to be hard work keeping him in a lineup every week. He would be a bench. I mean, yeah, probably not.
Yeah,
there's probably better options. I mean, you might as well just. Go and have a look at, like, I picked up Raimel Tapia this week just because he's got a full slate of games, and I'm thinking this week he might steal a lot of bases. Like, Tapia will probably leave my team within the next 2 weeks, but I'd rather do that. I'd rather look for who's got a lot of games in a given week and find the matchups,
Yeah, I think that's fair. Myers, I think I like him a little bit more than you guys, especially with them sending down McCormick. It looks like he's going to play pretty regularly, if not full time, on this Astros team. And the Astros lineup is a lineup I want to be a part of with guys. And he's a cheap dart throw. Like, if he doesn't work out, we'll know in the next week or two, and you can just move on to the next guy. But a guy who's got some pop and some speed and hitting in one of the best lineups in baseball, I think is a worthy gamble for a few bucks in Fab.
For sure.
Okay.
That is going to wrap us up for this episode. But before we leave, I need to ask Ryan the question we ask all our guests. Were you Dr. Dave?
No.
No,
I wish I could lay claim to that. No, I don't really have a theory on this, but there's only one Dr. Dave. The real deal is with us right now.
Yes, yes.
We
miss you, Dr. Dave Twitter account. Rest in peace. But we have not yet found out who the culprit is. Maybe it will be our next guest. I don't know who that's going to be. We're going to take next week off. Ryan, remind everybody where you can reach on social media and plug all your work.
Yeah, I'll remember this time. Find me at RotoTrix myself, and my good buddy who does the Roto Brits podcast with me is Mr. UK Miami Marlins himself, Peter Pratt. So between the two of us, we chat fantasy. We talk about the Marlins way too much. I pretend to be a Phillies fan, and if you ever want any advice from someone who knows more about hitting than pitching, come and say hello.
Dave, where can you be reached? What are you working on?
You can reach me at RunDMcD on Twitter, and you can find our two-start information on rotosource.com for two starts the current week and the following week.
There you go. You can reach me on Twitter at Justin Mason FWFB. You can reach Friends Fantasy Benefits on Twitter at Fantasy Benefits. I'm running daily over at Fangraphs, and I'm also on the Sleeper on the Bus podcast and CGFBI podcast. No episode next week. I'm going on vacation, and it'll be the 4th of July, I think, on Monday anyways. So maybe Dave and I could try to get together for a brief episode once I get back. But we will be back the following week with maybe a guest, maybe not. Maybe we get Peter Pratt on, who was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately had something pop up and couldn't make it. But you can definitely go follow him for all your Marlins related needs. For Ryan, Dave, and myself, thank you for listening. Have fantastic